That was fantastic. Thank you to Raj and the panel. And now it is my distinct honor to welcome my former colleague from New York One, the amazing Annika Pergament, to the stage to moderate our next discussion on why childcare matters to New York City's 24/7 workforce. Thank you, Annika.
Thank you so much, Grace. It's my honor to be here. Because we have a lot of panelists and a lot to get to in a short period of time, why don't I invite our panelists up to the stage as I just give you a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about, which, as Grace said, this is childcare in the non-traditional hours workforce, people who don't work those 9 to 5 jobs. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, just give you guys a brief overview of what we hope to get to. I'm going to do some brief introductions so that you know everybody's expertise here on the stage, and then we'll jump right into it. But obviously, childcare, as we've heard here today, touches pretty much every New Yorker in different ways. And there are opportunities and options for people who work those traditional 9 to 5 jobs. They're not perfect, but they do exist in some form. What we're going to get to here on this conversation is talking about the restaurant workers, the nurses, the people who perform on Broadway, delivery drivers, people who work basically all hours other than 9 to 5. What I want to dig into is really the specific needs of that non-traditional workforce, what's working, what's not working, the risks that we in this city face of not taking any action, how employers and public policymakers can step up to help address these issues, and ultimately how a publicly funded childcare system could better support this workforce, which, as we all know, is the backbone of New York City. So on to introductions. I haven't met you guys all personally yet, but we did meet on Zoom, and I've met a few of you personally. So I'm going to start with you, Charles Bonello, sitting to my left here, co-founder and CEO of Vivi. You guys may have seen it downstairs on the way in. Vivi is basically a company that partners with employers across the country to provide high-quality, flexible childcare solutions, including parents who work outside of those 9 to 5 schedules. Ari Edelson is representing the arts for us today, producer, director, and founding artistic director of the Orchard Project, which has developed hundreds of productions from Broadway to the West End and beyond. So you will speak to a little bit about what people who work in that sector, from on stage to behind the stage, are facing and those challenges. Rachel Manning, Vice President of Total Rewards at New York Presbyterian Hospital. There, Rachel oversees compensation and benefits for more than 45,000 employees, and that includes childcare and family support. And I know you and Charles work together with Vivi, so we can talk a little bit about what's working there and how that might be expanded elsewhere. And Liz and I have been chatting in the green room before now. Liz Murray, Chief Operating Officer at the Marlowe Collective, a hospitality group based here in Brooklyn, also co-founder of Women in Hospitality United. Liz sits on multiple boards across the city advocating for more equitable workplaces. And finally, Jessica, right in the middle there. Jessica Penley is owner of Letter Party, which is a small business that you built on Etsy. She's representative of really the growing number of freelance employees in the city, gig economy workforce, who power the city's economy. And we want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges workers like yourself face without the traditional safety nets and without an employer to support you with all of these benefits. I think what we can do is I'm going to start with the four of you, and then Charles, I'll get to you more solutions-based. But Liz, why don't you kick it off? Hospitality is one of the fields where remote work's not really possible. So talk about some of the challenges that you see in the hospitality industry.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So just to sort of root this in the reality of our workforce, hospitality is the second largest private employing industry in the country. So at scale, we employ huge numbers of people, but almost all of those people are employed in very, very small businesses, right? In New York, we're in the top quartile for racial diversity. We have overall lots of single parent households. Many of those single parent households are helmed by women, in part because there's a lot more scheduling flexibility, but almost all that scheduling flexibility exists at night. I mean, for me and for our workforce, both in the city and nationally, this is really an issue of economic mobility and providing women in particular and people of color with the support that they need in partnership through, and I think this has probably come up a lot today, in partnership through private and public support systems that enable people to really advance economically and advance professionally over the course of their, 20 or 40 years in the industry.
Rachel, talk a little bit about healthcare. Obviously, hospital workers don't work those 9 to 5 jobs. What are the biggest challenges that the people who you work with are facing in terms of childcare?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, for the healthcare industry specifically, there are a few nuances that are very unique. One is, as you mentioned, the lack of 9 to 5 schedules. We have people that work 12-hour shifts. We have people that work 10-hour shifts. We have people that start at 7 in the morning and go until 7 or 8 at night. When you talk about residents and fellows, it gets even more off kilter when you're factoring in some of the academic requirements they have in addition to practice. So all of that is part of the diversity of our workforce, and we're trying to fit people into a framework where most childcare, particularly site-based childcare, is usually 8 to 6 if you're lucky. Adding some complexity to that, we also have a workforce that veers largely female, particularly in certain areas of study and practice. And I wish that my friend from BCG were back up here. There have been numerous studies about the lack of qualified individuals graduating from nursing programs, from medical schools, becoming lab techs, pharmacy techs. There's this growing deficit of talent in the healthcare space. So not only are we trying to give our workforce flexibility around the schedules that we need to maintain a 24/7 operation, but we also have a workforce where we quite literally cannot afford to have people opt out. We need to get people to come back in. So all of those, not just women, it may be men, but largely women, after having children, if they cannot come back to the workforce, we're taking a deficit and we're exacerbating it further.
Jessica, speak to how a lack of an employer-sponsored healthcare plan, paid leave, impacts the decisions that you have to make as a freelancer.
So yeah, I actually became a freelancer while I was pregnant with my second child, because it was after the pandemic, and I was kind of like, I can't go back to this 9 to 5, like knowing what I kind of had. And I was like, New York State has leave. I had it with my first kid, but when you're a freelancer, that no longer applies to you, even though you've been paying into this system. So that was kind of like a shock. You just kind of take a hit. I mean, that's really the only way to do it. You do that, and then luckily, having working for myself and having a flexible schedule and being lucky enough to work from home, you can make it up, but you're kind of like you're sacrificing this time that you should be spending with your child or could be spending with your child because you need to make up this deficit in your income.
I'll move it over to you, Ari. Talk about the arts world, basically the same obstacles that production staff, actors, everybody who goes into a production faces, because once again, these are non-traditional hours we're talking about.
I have to say, first off, just listening to everybody else speak for the last few hours has been so inspiring because everybody's come up with so many amazing things to say about this, not only problem, but the opportunities that exist. And there's been a lot of conversation about this as it applies to a W-2 world, right? And the performing arts, even though Actors Equity has somehow figured out how to make essentially freelancers, W-2s temporarily, it's full of 1099ers. And the challenge, is fundamentally a question of how do you actually set up a consistency of an environment for not only you as an artist, performer, stage manager, backstage crew, but then also how do you create that consistency for the everyone around you, right? And there are many different industries that have been represented here today, and I've been really impressed by all of them. I would say that one thing that's also resonated with me is this unspoken conversation about the switching costs of retraining an individual, of bringing on new people onto your workforce and how difficult it might be. There is very few industries where it is as difficult as it is to replace an actor, right? Because there might be the only one or two people who can, I don't know, sing, dance, do whatever that is, because the thing was created for them. And so that is a unique problem this industry falls prey to, that we as a community have to step up to address. partially not only to create a environment where the industry can thrive, but also where it is representative of all of the people within this great city.
You've all painted a landscape of sort of what's broken, and let's unpack some of that and explore some things that are working, some things that aren't working, and maybe a path forward. Charles, I know that you guys partner with companies that are supporting non-traditional workforces. Focus on New York City and what you're seeing in terms of the New York City corporate landscape. What's working, what's not working, and where are the gaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think the gaps have been highlighted. Thank you. My takes. That was intentional. I think the gaps have been highlighted by a lot of my colleagues on the stage over here, right? If you had to boil it down to a single thing, it's likely around supply, because the demand is there. And childcare is one of the only industries where, in the entire developed economy, where demand outpaces supply by such a remarkable clip. Like, if you looked at those numbers, you'd be baffled. I think there's something like 3 or 4 times the number of children to available spots for them in New York City. And it's widespread. It's not just in, economically thriving areas or in lower income areas. It is widespread across the board. And I think part of that is because the infrastructure involved in it is so complex, is so heavily regulated, and frankly, there's the own supply problem in terms of recruiting, training, and developing exceptional caregivers. Because while there is a supply-demand imbalance, I also don't think that there's a market for low-quality care. This is the most vulnerable set of our population that we're entrusting with other people. And so, as we've looked through it, we have this very unique perspective and experience. We started our company, we launched our first school in July of 2019, which was a great time to open up a child care center. But it was also kind of the fire that we were forged in, because when COVID hit in March of 2020, we got the same letter that everybody else got that said, close your doors or go to jail. And after screaming into our pillow for a week, we came to and said, we're going to show up to serve. And so our first phone call was to our friends at NYP, and they needed that support. We were able to give it, and we opened up 16 hours a day, 7 days a week to support those heroic first responders. That has kind of colored our perspective in how we respond to that solution. And so what we've seen is a real need for it across the board, particularly in the educational side and on the healthcare side. And so, for example, some of the things that we've been able to do is work with great organizations like NYP to develop a program that aligns to their needs. So for our near-site campus on 68th Street, that's open from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. to accommodate those employees. And they have, again, their schedules, they might work 3 10s. My wife is a nurse, so I'm talking a little industry lingo on this. They might work 3 10s, and those 3 days might be different days throughout the week. To be able to offer that and support them takes leadership and vision from the organizational side to say, we know that these are our people, and we can only thrive if they do. And it's something that we're really proud to do. I think the other side of it that has been difficult is doing this in a high quality and regulated fashion is expensive. There's the real estate costs, right? And while there are wonderful developers, there's also real challenges around that. There's the regulatory side. I don't think there's any 24/7 care in New York City. Do you know that you need to have a shower in every classroom if you want to have 24/7 childcare for infants and toddlers and preschoolers that might be sleeping? You need to have a certified teacher there during this, and certified teachers are in very short supply and also very expensive. And so it's all well-intentioned and thoughtful around creating an exceptional program for the people who need it most, but it's also some real practical impediments to more widespread development of it.
Yeah, and I guess that gets to the question of what it would take to build a system that meets people where they are in all of these really disparate industries. And I wonder if you have given thought to that from a policy perspective, any of you, what you would like to see in terms of a publicly funded system that might be able to support a workforce like you have each described. And Liz, I'll start with you, and you guys can sort of take it down the line.
Sure. I mean, so much of what everyone has said really resonates and is reflected in our industry. I think the thing I would say is that, to your point about how expensive this is, most of our workers are frontline workers, and most of our parents are actually in the back of house And so they're earning on average somewhere between 18 and $24 an hour. And so part of the issue with the private side of this is, of course, that it only exacerbates the supply issue because it's very challenging to create supply at a level where people who are earning that income can afford it, right? And so I think in terms of what a public partnership might look like, it is something like expanding this pre-K and 3K to after, much longer after school programming. Almost all of our working families, working parents rely heavily on elder care for child support. I mean, my sister and her wife are in Texas and they need my mom. It's like, it's just the reality, I think, for most people. And the problem with that is that elder care support is then also very unreliable because elders need their own kind of care, right? So I think like, if I'm dreaming, which I'm going to do here for a minute with y'all, it is some part of thinking as a city, right, of what that long-term or longer hours of the day care looks like, not just for our youngest citizens, but our oldest too, and how we can really, I think those two things are linked for me, and thinking about what those kind of care systems look like, particularly for people who wouldn't be able to afford a private option that is high quality. I think that's the part where when I'm dreaming, that's what I think about, right? Like just more intergenerational care communities.
I share the sentiment on the expansion of publicly available, whether it's subsidies, whether it's care centers, whether it's individuals that can travel, right? Again, with such a diverse workforce that we have, the needs are all very different. And I do think this has come up a number of times during the course of the day. There is an opportunity for employers to really think about the investment that they're making in their workforce and how it serves them as a business. And I feel very fortunate to work for an organization. NYP is here to serve the community. So the notion of investing in what our employees need, our employees are part of those communities. They're not a separate group of people. And we also, just as an aside, put money into community-based organizations. We think about the benefit to childcare in general, having healthy meals, good education. That's a rising tide that lifts all ships. And when we think about what employers can do, yes, it's a great way to differentiate yourself as an employer, to add those benefits, to subsidize those, to give discounts, and to work with partners like Vivi and others that are out in the marketplace. We've benefited from it a lot, but I also recognize that it's a drop in the bucket. And we have so many different individuals living in different places, coming from different circumstances. I don't know that our programs could ever actually meet the needs. So we need to continue to work on that combination of employers stepping up to the plate, but also some public policy to help.
Yeah, I mean, and Jessica, speak to when there is no employer to help carry that cost for freelancers, what does that look like in terms of a public policy perspective?
So Liz kind of touched on this, but I rely a lot on family members. I rely a lot on, college kids and high school kids too, because they're flexible. But there's programs that if your family member is taking care of an older family member, you can do that through the state or the government. And I always watch those commercials. I'm like, why can't I do that for my kids? Like, what doesn't my aunt get paid from that way, or my mom? And of course I can contribute to that, but it would be a huge help if something like that existed.
All right.
I'll see if this works. Does it work? No. Okay, it's not working. Okay. Likewise, I rely on family a huge amount. I'm a father of a third grader and a sixth grader, and just moved directly next door to my in-laws in Manhattan, specifically for this reason. And I think that I'm fortunate that I have those resources at hand, and I've spent the day sort of thinking myself in three ways. Like, okay, this is me, my little dinky organization, nonprofit. We wanted to make sure that there were as many female playwrights on Broadway, so we have healthcare because we want to basically create the world that we want to be in, right, and that we want to see. Okay, that's us. That's me, my little thing. Then there's me in an industry. And then I think the third one, which is me as a citizen in a larger community. And what's really fascinating about the conversation today is the vocabulary that seems to be created that address this, probably number 2 and number 3, right? That we need to have shared vocabulary that provide symbiotic aligned resources quite frankly, at a more aligned, consistent cost basis for various industries and are consistent for those of us who are in 1099 existences, right? And so the various public sector ideas that I've heard spoken about today are so important because not only do they sort of create a kind of a little bit of a, I don't know, 20%, 30% savings on the, like on the dollar, because they're actually better than some of the other systems that exist just on a pure financial level. This is what I've learned today, so thank you for all of you who have taught me. But they create new FTEs. They create new employees. They create new disposable income. They actually exist. And by the way, I only made it through the first chapter of the Ezra Klein book, if any of you read it. But I do, like, it is a world of abundance, right? And like this, the idea here is abundance will actually make each of our industries bigger, make all of us actually have a greater quality of life. So that level of abundance when applied to childcare is really, really important.
Charles, can you talk a little bit about if the employer-sponsored plans only focus on a certain sector, right? They leave out freelancers, and they potentially leave out lower income people. What? How can the government, how can public policy step in when you're not talking about employer-sponsored plans?
Yeah, and I think that's such an important question. I would point out that almost all of our employer partners have tiered support systems where people who make less get a greater benefit for them to help make it more accessible and really achieve their goals. When I think about it from a public policy perspective, there's really 3 or 4 categories that come to mind. The first is looking at what models exist out there today. At the federal level and largely at the state level, we take a carrot approach in the United States. You might have seen IRS 45F, which is an employer-sponsored child care tax credit. It allows employers to offset their net cost by 25% up to $150,000 per year. That's not a ton of money. As part of recent legislation, that was actually tripled. It's now 50% and $500,000. New York State, a couple of years ago, introduced a similar tax credit that stacks on top of it and is actually refundable. So if you don't have a tax basis, you're getting money back from the state for doing that. That's one set of policy incentives. The second is, I think it's Michigan. Michigan has a third model where employers contribute a third, the state contributes a third, and the families contribute a third. And it might not sound like the perfect solution, but guess what? You get out there really quickly and you create a lot of leverage for individuals. And then if we look internationally, India has a very interesting model. They introduced the Maternity Child Care Act, I think in 2019. And every employer with more than 50 employees has to give their people access to a child care facility, either that they contract with, that they run themselves, or they have to pay functionally a tax that goes into a pot to help develop additional child care. And I think any of those are really interesting models. The challenge with the tax credit side has been, I don't know that it has changed anybody's mind from saying we don't want to offer child care as a benefit. And now we do, right? And I don't have the data to back that up either way. The last part of this is that question of how do we expand supply and make it more accessible. And New York City has been a leader on this. Again, having opened up child care centers in other areas of the world, we found that it's actually more Byzantine and complex doing this in some other states, which should be a relief to all of us. The city has listened though, and so you heard Josh earlier today talking from Etsy talking about how child care centers in New York City have to be on the ground floor. That's true. There's no real, I mean, that's a safety reason, but we don't put NICUs on the ground floor. There are ways to get around this, and recently the city has introduced new ways that aren't perfect, but at least give you a path to opening up a child care center on the second floor or in the basement. Because here's the thing, when you do that, you triple or quadruple the amount of available inventory for child care centers to open in, which does 2 things. Number 1, it reduces their costs significantly, which can reduce the tuition that they charge. And number 2, by increasing supply, you're meeting that demand and prices go down, or you could pay teachers more. It's one of those 2 things, I think.
I mean, the city has functioned for a long time with these massive infrastructure problems in terms of childcare for this set of workers. So a lot of people don't see the urgency that you guys are speaking to. It sort of operates in the shadows. So I guess in terms of a closing thought from each of you, and we can go down the line like we've been doing, Liz, if you can speak to the risks of not addressing these issues, the urgency of them, and the benefits of addressing them now and plotting a viable course forward.
Sure. I mean, just the most basic level, we're losing talent. I mean, I think a couple other people have touched on this. We're losing talent across the city. It's leaving to go to places specifically that are easier to, and less expensive to raise families. Duh. And I love what you said about realizing that if you wanted more women playwrights, you needed to offer healthcare. I mean, I think this is, I think about so much of this because it's just the lens of my work, but through the lens of gender equity. And for me, the urgency is we have an overwhelming economic inequality issue in this country. We are seeing it impact our politics at the local and national levels in an extreme way. And until we face that problem head on with all of these incredible, you know, there's been, this day is full of solutions and possibilities. But I think for me, if like, that's why I grounded what I said in this economic mobility issue, unless we actually address that for the people who struggle the most to live in this country and to raise families in this country, it feels incredibly urgent. And I think if it doesn't for anyone, maybe you're maybe like unplugged from the news, which is great. But it seems that we have reached the tipping point of this issue in this country.
It's an issue of supply and demand for talent and exacerbating a current problem for our industry. So if this is not solved or at least eased in some level, we'll continue to see people leave, whether they're leaving the city, whether they're leaving the workforce in general. And again, in the space that I'm working, we already know that there is a crisis brewing. People are living longer, healthcare demands are increasing. We already have a absence of long-term care options. It's very difficult for people to age in place. There's a lack of infrastructure around certain aspects of healthcare to begin with. And now we're in an environment where it's more difficult for a nurse or a tech or a pathologist to come back from parental leave. Some places don't even have parental leave, hopefully not in the healthcare space, certainly not for us, but that's also an issue. And we have to see 3-5 years out. We won't be talking about what if or when. We will say, wow, we don't have enough nurses to be at the bedside. We don't have enough people to run lab tests, and there's no one to do this x-ray. And that's how you have people sitting in EDs and not moving forward to a bed. It creates this downstream effect of poor care, and then the community at large suffers. So yes, as an employer, it's scary, but when I think about the impact to the community that we serve, that's where it really starts to become problematic.
And just to kind of like touch on, you know, what you were saying about people leaving the workforce, I think that, I mean, I know that having your own business and, you know, being an Etsy seller or being a freelancer is a good way to keep women kind of in the workforce because it allows us flexibility, even with the lack of childcare and all of these things. So I just wish there was a way to make it easier. Like if you make it easy for women, especially, you know, you'll have us back in the workforce just in a kind of different capacity, maybe.
Was it 19%, that number that Brad Lander said before? That's crazy. That's just people lifting up and moving, right? And then there's the people leaving a very, like an industry as well. So that's just enough. Like we all live in New York City. It's the greatest city in the entire universe. Like if there are other, you know, cities on other planets, I don't know. But we like, and the reason is like, as Liz, is because of the restaurants. It's because of all of the stuff here. Right? And so if we want to actually be in that greatest city in the universe, we have to actually create the infrastructure where people can participate in it. It's almost like you're literally getting in their way if you don't create an infrastructure in which they can't contribute to the city.
I think I echo what everybody said, right? We're going to see people leaving the city. And Vivi thrives, we all thrive, this city thrives when it's vibrant, when it's growing, and like people are gonna leave in two ways. First, they're gonna move, and two, human beings by nature are hopeful and you know want to grow with each other. Like, there's a reason why people are having fewer children. Like, there are just going to be no children to replace them if we don't make it possible to have children where you live or where you want to live. And I think that like, yes, we can go into this weird Elon Musk, discussion of population growth and collapse, but I don't take it like that. I take it as like, this is the fabric of the city in which we live, and we want to make it a vibrant, wonderful, thoughtful place where people can thrive and have that hope, because it's what makes us special.
Yeah, I mean, thank all of you. Obviously, you've illustrated that New York, we all know, is a 24/7 city. Thank you for highlighting these issues for us. Obviously, childcare is much more than nice to have. It's the backbone of a functioning and thriving city. And so I appreciate all of your time and this great insight and expertise. Grace?